Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Pozos, and here with me is Omar Pozos, my co-host, husband, and tech guy who has been failing at his job today.
We've tried starting the podcast, I think 3 times now, but I think 4th time is the charm on this one. We'll see.
Technology is not my friend, which is why I put him in charge of it. So, he's going to get fired here soon, but we'll see. He's still doing his job. Today I wanted to talk about something that kind of just inspired me from some conversations I was having on Instagram. So, a lot of the podcast topics that I choose and like the outlines that I create for our episodes each week typically just come from either things that are on my mind, that's something I'm struggling with, or it might be something that I'm talking about with a client, or it might be something that I'm talking about, with maybe one of you like chatting on Instagram or just kind of messaging back and forth and seeing how I can help, how I can support you, what resources I can get you, things like that. And that's where this specific episode came from. And so I was essentially having a conversation with somebody on Instagram, and she had mentioned that she's been really struggling with her weight and feeling like her metabolism is really slowed down and just feeling really, really stuck. And so she said something that I was like, okay, I need to dig in here a little bit. She mentioned, I feel like I just am not losing weight the way I used to lose weight. And that's a very common thing I hear for a lot of women who are struggling with slow metabolisms, with a lot of metabolic dysfunction. But I don't ever like to jump to conclusions by taking, somebody saying something like that and assuming that means metabolic dysfunction. Typically, I like to ask a little bit more questions and kind of dive in a little bit. So I asked her, yeah, okay, I totally hear you. What do you mean by that? Like, what did it used to look like compared to what does it look like now with trying to lose weight? And she said, well, in the past, I lost 25 pounds in 2 months, and now like the scale's, hardly moving at all. And I was like, oh, okay, I see the problem here. This is something where a lot of women struggle with expectations that are unrealistic.
Yeah.
And I think this can end up being for a lot of women, like the number one thing that holds you back is unrealistic expectations in your weight loss or fat loss journey. And when we're talking about, if we want to lose weight, if we want to be healthier, if we want to, reach specific goals with our body composition, we have to make sure that our expectations going into that are realistic, or else guess what? You're going to get into it and you're going to be feeling like, man, I feel like I'm, a failure. I feel like this isn't working. I feel like I'm stuck, and motivation is just going to go like, woo, like way down.
Do that one more time. Woo.
And when motivation goes down, what happens? Like we give up on ourselves.
Yeah, discipline goes out the door.
Yeah.
You have no desire to do the things you're supposed to. I think you're right. It's like, it's to me, it's the spark that either keeps you going or you're like, you know what, F this, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah. So that's where I wanted to take an episode today. Probably we'll keep this one a little bit more short and really just give you guys the education you need. But I want this episode to be really for you to figure out, how long does it realistically take for me to reach my goal weight? Like how long, like what should my expectations be? That's my goal, my intention today for you in this episode. Now, the reality is, when it comes to losing body fat, losing weight, we didn't probably put on the weight, overnight. We probably didn't put it on in a month or even 2 months. So trying to think that we're going to lose that same amount of weight in 1 month or 2 months or just, kind of overnight probably doesn't really make sense, right? Like just in that line of thinking, we can already go ahead and like evaluate our expectations a little bit. But let's even like put some kind of numbers and some math behind this to like help people kind of figure out what's realistic for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So in order to lose weight, you must be in what is called a calorie deficit. If you have been listening to me for a long time, you're very aware of this. You're like, all right, Vanessa, let's skip to the good stuff. But I want to make sure we're covering our bases and not making sure or not assuming that anybody has any kind of assumptions about what we're meaning here. You must be in a calorie deficit to lose weight, which essentially means you must be eating less than your body is burning. You must be consuming less calories than your body maintains weight on, lower than your maintenance calories. That is a calorie deficit. However, that does not mean that we just want to eat as little amount of calories as possible. And a lot of people make that mistake. They think, oh, well, I would love to lose weight as fast as possible. Like I would love to lose, 25 pounds in 2 months. So why don't I just eat as little as possible? Like I don't even need to track my calories. I'm literally just going to make sure I'm eating
once a day.
as little as possible. The less, the better, right? And in theory, that sounds like that should be a good idea. Like, oh, I'll just lose weight faster. I'll get there faster. Like, that sounds great. But it doesn't really work out that way, especially for women. It's going to destroy your hormones if you're not giving your body sufficient nutrients. It's going to feel really, really hard to eat as little as possible. It's going to feel really, probably frustrating and annoying and just difficult at times. And so it's going to be difficult to maintain that, which really sets you up for a rebound effect afterwards. So even if you do really restrict yourself and if you do drop a lot of weight very quickly, you are much more likely to gain that weight back very, very quickly.
And I think too, the other thing, and you've kind of talked about it now, but it just sets you up for failure in the fact that if you hate yourself or if you have an event going on or you're on vacation and you just can't stick with it, you're going to go rebound to the other side and you're like, you know what, F this. Now instead of me trying to eat once a day or not anything at all, now I'm going to eat anything and everything just because I can't keep up with it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So if we are looking at, okay, but what's like an appropriate calorie deficit then? Like, how should I set up a calorie deficit?
That was going to be my next question, because people are going to be like, okay, cool, Vanessa. So like, how much should I eat, or what is a calorie deficit for me?
Yeah, because like we need to be eating less than we're burning, but we can't be eating too little to where we, our hormones suffer, our metabolism slows down, and we set ourselves up for regain, or we just end up losing more kind of muscle mass than body fat, and ultimately just not kind of where we want to be, right? So putting some kind of science behind this here, theoretically, 1 pound of body fat is 3,500 calories stored in your body. Because remember, calories is ultimately a unit of energy. Like, calories literally comes from the Latin word calor, which means heat. Calories are heat. Calories are energy in the body. So body fat is storing that energy. It's storing the excess calories. So if you want your body to use that storage, use that excess, then you need to make sure that we have a little bit of a deficit, which is going to cause it to pull from it a little bit, right? Well, if we wanted to, let's say, lose 1 pound per week, which is a fairly sustainable rate of weight loss, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit more here. Essentially, what that means is we need to be eating in a 3,500 calorie deficit total per week. So math, 3,500 divided by 7 is... your eyes just widened.
Shoot, I don't know, 350? No.
500.
500, 7 times 5, 35. Yes.
I love the reaction. I'm just putting you on the spot there.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, so that would be a 500 calorie deficit per day. So like if you know that your maintenance calories, the amount of calories that you can maintain your current body weight on is, let's say, easy math, 2,500, then you would want to be eating in like around 2,000 calories per day. That being said, I almost in no situation recommend people jump straight to a 500 calorie deficit per day. And let me explain. There's some reasoning behind this. Even though mathematically, theoretically, because we know 3,500 calories equals about 1 pound of body fat. So if you were in a 3,500 calorie per week deficit, you should theoretically lose 1 pound of body fat per week. We have to kind of factor in some different variables here, including like the psychological variables, including kind of like from anecdotally working with nearly 1,000 women at this point, being able to kind of like track a lot of data and seeing what ends up being most effective in the long run. Typically, I have found that it's actually most effective to start somebody in around a 250 to 300 calorie deficit. The reason I like to do this is because ultimately I want everybody to be able to lose weight on the most amount of calories as possible, because that means you can lose weight while still eating the foods that you like to eat that are more calorie dense, that are a little bit higher in calories. So if you like to have pizza with your family on Friday nights, you could probably still have that pizza if you were in that 250 to 300 calorie deficit, as opposed to in a 500 calorie deficit, it becomes a lot harder to eat that.
Yeah.
So that being said, if we can still lose, even if it's not necessarily a full pound per week, but we're losing like half to 3/4 of a pound per week, I find that people are more consistent and on track and able to stick to that deficit than they are when we get into more of that 500 calorie deficit. So that's why we'll typically start there and see how the body responds. On top of that, there's a big psychological effect here. And again, this is where I bring in more like anecdotal evidence. I use a very scientific approach to our nutrition strategies, but I'm not somebody who's one of those that's just like married to the science. So I'm like, oh, this study says this, so this is what we'll do. No, like I take the science, I factor that in, I use that for a lot of our decision making, but I also look at what's actually really working in our everyday women who are not necessarily the people who are in those research studies, and it may not be applicable to them in their lives. And so something that I've found that typically happens, this kind of like a phenomena that I find happens when someone is going into more of a calorie deficit, is a lot of times switching into a new kind of phase of your journey. For our clients, we call this the refine phase because it's not just as simple as a calorie deficit. We use a lot of different, very specific strategies that are very unique to our coaching program. So like when a client shifts into a refine phase, I see this almost every time where it's like a new feeling of excitement and just a new feeling of motivation going into a new phase. So what that might mean is that as, let's say if they were in the previous phase, maybe eating at maintenance calories, and maybe in the refine phase, they're going to be going into that calorie deficit. That alone, they probably are going to be a little bit more on point with their tracking. And that's very, very important because when we're making an assumption that someone's eating at maintenance calories, but they might have not been like as on point with things, they might actually be eating a little bit higher, a little bit lower. They may actually be moving a little bit less. They might not really be exactly on that maintenance calorie point. Now we shift into like that new phase. They're excited. They're like on point with their tracking. They're tracking everything. There are no little bites, licks, tastes that are going unaccounted for, untracked. And because of that, they might actually be creating a tiny bit more of a deficit than we actually think they are because they might have been actually eating a little bit more prior than what was showing on the numbers on their food logs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let me kind of, I guess, break that down a little bit and correct me if I'm not understanding what you're saying, but it sounds like for you, what you're saying is, sure, at times, if we can lose half a pound, 3/4 of a pound, but do it in a way where it doesn't feel restrictive or it doesn't feel like it's overwhelming. But then two, if it's to the point where it's like it keeps you motivated, it keeps you to the point where you can stay true to yourself and do the things that you're supposed to do. In the long run, you're going to be able to see more changes because, again, it's not taking over your whole life or you're not having to restrict yourself or you're not having to do all of these crazy approaches. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Exactly. I also think that if we're immediately jumping from, a maintenance calorie point to a 500 calorie deficit, that can feel like a very drastic change, which can make you feel, a little bit more hungry, can make you feel like
cravings probably go through the roof, would you say?
I wouldn't say cravings go through the roof, especially with like the way that we coach our clients. We very much mitigate
I'm saying
that.
If you go crazy into like a $500 calorie deficit or 500 calorie deficit right off the bat, like if you're pretty aggressive right off the bat.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that cravings are affected. I would just say in general, like physiological hunger is going to be higher because there's such a drastic difference between kind of the maintenance calorie point and that big deficit, as opposed to if we kind of like slowly work our way there over time, once we get to that 500 calorie deficit mark, which we don't even necessarily have to get to for many people, but if and when we do get there, it doesn't feel as drastic. You don't feel as hungry getting there. And this is the art of coaching. This is really the way that we do things. It's not like so many like macro coaches or so many coaches that are like using, macros and calorie deficits and different things. They just are so married to the science on things. Like, oh, we need to do this because of this number. And they wonder why their clients are struggling to get results because we have to take in the psychological factors of weight loss and of a body recomposition journey. And this is just one of those many examples of kind of like the ways that we do that and how we go about that. The other factor I was kind of wanting to bring in here is, again, as we have that surge of motivation, typically I find that people, even just very subtly, start to move a little bit more. They might have started to get a little bit complacent in some like habits and routines when eating at maintenance calories. And now we go into the calorie deficit and suddenly they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to like really start seeing a little bit more fat loss here. And now they're like going for more walks. They're just like getting up and moving around a little bit more. And just like psychologically, they actually put themselves into a little bit of a bigger deficit as well on top of it. So that's another reason why we might not necessarily want to jump to that 500 calorie deficit within our calorie numbers, because if they're also moving more, it means they're burning more calories. It means that they actually could end up being in like a 600 or 700 calorie deficit, which would make them very hungry. And we don't want them to be hungry. We don't want them to be at that point. We want them to feel satisfied and feeling good in that journey, essentially.
Yeah, 100%. Can I put you on the spot now for a second?
Sure.
So obviously, this is all, I think this is the right way to do it. And with having this, obviously, the experience, the structured approach and everything, I think that's the most successful way to do it. But can we look at it from the other perspective for a second? For somebody that's like, Vanessa, you don't understand. like I can't lose half a pound. I need to be losing 2-3 pounds a week because I have so-and-so's wedding, or I have a beach vacation, or I have, I don't know, my anniversary or whatever's coming up. Can you like talk to that person for a second and just, if anything, give them a little bit of advice as to why maybe sometimes slower is better in the long run?
Yeah. Well, if you were to come to me and say, I need to lose weight for this specific event that's, next month or 2 months from now or 3 months from now, I have to lose this amount of weight for that event. My question for you would be, okay, but what about after the event? Do we want to just lose weight for that event and then have ourselves be back where we currently are after the event or a few months after the event? Or would you like to lose weight for the event and be able to keep that weight off for the next, 3 years? Because if it's the former, if you truly are like, I just need to look good for that event and I don't care what happens afterwards, like I can gain every pound back and I'm happy with that, then let's be as aggressive as possible and lose as much weight as possible. You also, realistically, probably will also lose some muscle mass during that. Your metabolism's going to be affected. You're not going to feel great. You might like the way that you look in terms of being smaller come that event. You might be happy with seeing a lower number on the scale for that event, but you're not going to feel your best. You're probably not going to look as good as you would if you retained more muscle and possibly even built muscle during that process of losing body fat. And ultimately, I find that most people actually want to keep the weight off that they lose. They want to keep it off long term. So that being said, it's not necessarily a choice of, do I want to lose weight fast or do I want to lose weight slow? It's more of, do you just want to lose weight sustainably? That is the question you have to ask yourself, because it might not necessarily mean that we have to lose weight slowly. We need to find what is actually sustainable for you and your body, because oftentimes if people are trying to chase really fast weight loss, or they're trying to lose 25 pounds in 2 months, they're not going to actually reach that goal anyway, because that's freaking hard to do. If it's easier for you to lose on average 3/4 of a pound per week, or maybe even like it is 1 pound per week for you, is like, because this is also where we have to bring in factors like, where are we starting from? What is our starting weight? What's our kind of overall body size? A bigger person at a heavier weight can lose more weight in a short period of time compared to a smaller person. It's really, we're looking kind of at like that percentage of body weight is a factor as well when we're talking about like how much is sustainable for you to lose per week on that week-to-week basis.
Another thing that I think that you just mentioned, Ness, that I think is really valuable to kind of expand for just a couple of seconds is, are you actually wanting to lose body fat, or are you just wanting to see a lower number on the scale? Because if you're just wanting to see a lower number on the scale, then, stop drinking water and you're going to, see a lower number, but you're going to be dehydrated and you're going to be, again, not in a good place. But the other thing too is, if you just want to see a lower number on the scale, and you don't care about losing, muscle, you don't care about messing up your hormones, metabolism, then sure, that's what these approaches are for. But like you were saying, if you want to do it sustainably to where you can maybe even put on some muscle and have a much better body composition, I think that's where a lot of people also get it wrong, because they just base it off of, can I just fit into these size pants, or this dress, or you don't see a number on the scale, and they don't understand the consequences of all the stuff that they're doing too,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think just to kind of give you guys like a reference point here, this is not like hard facts, hard rules, but overall, just kind of like off the top of my head, I would say if you consider yourself probably more of a smaller person to where you're like, I have weight to lose that could be, 10, 20, 30 pounds, but like even if it's as much as 30 pounds, that's where it's like, if you lost 30 pounds, you would really have realistically no more weight that you like need to lose. And we're not talking about like super low body fat percentages, like stepping on stage level. I just mean of like, if you lost that 30 pounds, you would be realistically have a great body that you'd be like, I don't have a reason to really need more to lose more weight. I can happily maintain this now. So if you're that type of person, I would say realistically, a rate of sustainable weight loss might look like 2 to 5 pounds per month on average. I also have to emphasize the on average point. I'm going to explain that a little bit more in a second. But now if we are maybe somebody that has a little bit more weight to lose, we are maybe a bigger person with more of like 30 to 50, 70, even 100 pounds to lose, although getting up into more of that 75 and greater weight, like we can even get a little bit higher sometimes with the rate of weight loss. But more in that like 30 to 75 pound range, I would say typically I would like to see more of a 4 to 6 pounds of weight loss per month. And the reason again is because it's a we're looking at like percentage of total body weight. And when we're losing weight on the scale, it's not entirely body fat. There is going to be water weight. There's going to be inflammation that we're dropping. And if we do it recklessly, there would be muscle mass dropped as well. The way we do it, we prevent losing any muscle mass. But that's why, especially for people that are puffier, who are maybe bigger, who are dealing with a lot of inflammation, you might see a big drop on the scale, or you might even see visibly a big change in their body at certain points in time, and it looks like they lose a lot of weight very rapidly. That's typically a big amount of like puffiness. That's like a balloon kind of deflating a little bit. I saw this in myself last year when I was really finally getting hormones really in a great spot to where my body was really starting to respond to a calorie deficit at that point. I found that like within that first initial 2 months, even though like my weight on the scale didn't change a lot, it looked suddenly like I dropped a bunch of weight because it was, again, it's like kind of deflating a balloon. I just like suddenly had all this puffiness from my face, from my arms, from like my limbs, even just kind of like some distension in my belly, like just kind of like, whoop, totally just went down. I'm nailing the sound effects here on this episode. But it was, honestly, I was kind of shocked. I was like, wow, I didn't really lose much weight in the scale, but like I can see a big difference in my photos and I can feel a big difference in my clothes. For some people, that does show up on the scale as a big difference too. We see that a lot with like flush protocols. You'll see oftentimes a big drop on the scale because we're losing a lot of that puffiness and inflammation. Then from there, again, we're talking about sustainable rate of fat loss, but on the scale, that's where smaller people, probably that 2 to 5 pound per month mark, a little bit more weight to lose, a little bit bigger people, probably more of that on the low end, probably 3, but more of like 4 to 5, maybe even 6 pounds per month sometimes. Again, want to emphasize the on average point. This is especially important for women when wanting to lose weight. You cannot compare your weight from like day 1 of the month to the end of the month and just compare that as like how much weight am I losing. You cannot even compare week over week how much weight am I losing. That's because our bodies as women are on a monthly cycle that involves weight gain and loss even at maintenance. It is very, very normal for smaller women to have a fluctuation on the scale over the course of the month of typically 3 to 5 pounds within your cycle. Bigger women, same thing, percentage of body weight, this might be 5 to 10 pounds. So think about how like frustrating that can be when, let's say, you start a calorie deficit, first week you're like, boom, I'm down 2 pounds. Like, this is going great. Next week, I'm like, okay, I'm down, a pound. Things are still going well. And suddenly the following week, you're like, wait a second, I'm up 2 pounds. What's going on? Next week, oh my God, I'm up 4 pounds. What's going on? This isn't working for me. I'm giving up on myself now. Hey, that might just be the natural changes in body weight over the course of your cycle. So that is why I encourage women to look at averages over the month and to compare 1 month to the next, even like every 2 months to the next, and compare one point in the cycle to the other. So when comparing your weights on the scale, don't compare how you were at the beginning of your menstrual cycle to how you were at the midpoint of your menstrual cycle the next month. Compare the beginning of your menstrual cycle to the beginning of your menstrual cycle the next month. And that's more basis, comparable data. Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
So that being said, to give you guys an example here, so like I kind of mentioned my own journey last year. I initially dropped a good bit of inflammation, which made it look like I dropped a lot of weight in photos initially. But if I actually look at the numbers on the scale, because I pulled this up just to be like, okay, wait a second, like how much weight did I lose? Because there was a point in time where I think I remember getting a comment from somebody that was like, you're losing weight way too fast. And they're just going off of my photos, which is hilarious, honestly. Like, you're losing weight way too fast. You preach sustainable results, and you definitely are losing weight too quickly. And so I just remember thinking like, I haven't actually lost very much weight on the scale. Like, what the heck? So I went back and I looked, and I really started more, I started kind of pushing into a calorie deficit, I think probably June of 2023, at that point when my hormones were in a great spot. It took my body a month to actually start responding. That's another thing. Your body doesn't always respond to a deficit right away. So I would say in July was when I started to see the scale go down. Things started to respond. I would say August, I saw a big drop in inflammation, a big visual change in my body. And then from there, it was just like a slow, kind of gradual drop in the scale month over month. Had a lot of fluctuations upwards, had some fluctuations downwards. But if I compared month over month, I was losing a couple of pounds per month on average. I had a specific goal of, we had our honeymoon and our 1-year anniversary to Mexico in November. So having that kind of a deadline, I was like, I am going to be super dialed in and disciplined. So
and you started in June and our honeymoon was in November, right?
Yep. So I was like really, really on point for those couple of months as well. And so even with that, I still wasn't seeing like a super rapid rate of loss. Then I would say like November, December, once we got through the honeymoon, then we had Thanksgiving, we had Christmas, we had a little bit of travel. I think I like pulled off a little bit to where at that point, to be honest with you, I just wasn't really on point with my tracking. So I probably wasn't really losing. I know I wasn't really losing during that point. I was just kind of maintaining. And then in January, I got dialed back in again, and I went back in that deficit then for, I think, another couple of months. So in total, from July through April, I went back and looked at all my numbers. I lost, again, these are like a range because fluctuations, and I was tracking daily for the most part, my weight. I lost around 20 to 25 pounds over 8 months.
Okay.
For myself, I'm like, realistically, it's kind of, for some people, they'd be like, 25 pounds in 8 months, like that sounds kind of slow, or 20 pounds in 8 months, that sounds really slow. Think again of this person I was talking to.
That's about 3 pounds a month, roughly, right?
Yeah.
8 times 3. Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think, would hear that and be like, man, I have to, if I have 30, 40, 50 pounds I want to lose, and it took you 8 months to lose that amount of weight, like it's going to take me forever to lose this weight. So I want to give that kind of a very realistic, real world example that sometimes we just have to be patient, and we just have to focus on the process and trust that the weight on the scale is ultimately a lag measure. It is a measure of the things that have already happened. It's not something we can control immediately overnight. So we cannot allow that measurement, that number, that weight on the scale to dictate how we feel about our progress.
Yeah. And for perspective too, can you share this really quick? So it took you 6 to 8 months to lose the 30 pounds, but how long did it take you to also...
Just to clarify, it didn't take 6 to 8 months to lose 30 pounds. It took 8 months to lose 20 to 25 pounds.
Sorry. Yeah, I was reading the other line. Anyways, 6 or 8 months to lose the 20, 25 pounds, but how long did it take you to even be able to be in a position to lose the weight, to like restore your hormones? I mean, we're talking, 2 years, give or take, a year and some change?
Yes, but also realistically, that was because I was very much in a learning process of like figuring things out. It was like once I acquired all the knowledge, I really worked with some really incredible experts to get all the systems in place. And these are the systems that we use with our clients now. That's where things like started to happen more quickly. It doesn't take, somebody 2 years realistically to get their hormones in balance to be able to lose weight. It probably will take some time depending on the extent of your metabolic dysfunction and your hormonal dysfunctions. We have to allow the body to take the lead. We cannot force the body to lose weight faster than it feels comfortable doing. So I know this can all feel kind of frustrating and disappointing when you're like, but I have that wedding I'm going to next month that I would love to lose, 15 pounds for that next month. And it's like, okay, but we have to zoom out here and not think about just what we want that number to be at next month, but where do we want that number to be next year and the year after and the year after that, and really have that long-term viewpoint, because that's going to guide us to make decisions in the day-to-day that serve our future self and our future body that we actually want to have.
A great analogy. I've been on the car analogies like for a minute now. But think of it from this perspective, and I forget where I heard this, but you can get from point A to point B in a car, and let's say it takes you an hour. You can also go 150 miles an hour, and it might take you 20 minutes, but the chances of you crashing, the chances of you getting into an accident are far more likely than if you were to do it in a way that's sustainable. So to me, I get it, because I'm also one of the most impatient persons I've ever met in my life. But I'm like, if there's a risk of me also messing up my hormones or my body or my relationship with food, my just mindset, my mental health, I'm like, I'd rather just do things in a way that's easier, that's sustainable, and most importantly, in a way that I can actually lose the weight and keep it off for good too,
Exactly.
So just one thing to consider there.
Exactly. Yeah. So I hope that this was valuable for you all to really be able to pinpoint and set realistic expectations for yourself with reaching a goal weight that you have in mind. I do also recommend, if it's a big number, then break it down into chunks. Say, okay, if I want to lose 100 pounds, let's focus on, 25 pounds at a time. And let's just set that goal. Let's get to that 25 pound. Let's hang there, make sure that sticks before we now reach for the next 25 pounds, and kind of just go like one step at a time, because what you don't want it to be like a slide that you go down. You're like, woo, I'm going so fast down this slide. And now suddenly it's like actually a roller coaster. And I'm going right back up again. We want this to be like walking down a set of stairs where we're just like, okay, we take one step down. We're going to hang here, make sure we're good, make sure we're staying, we're not going back up. Okay, now let's take another step down and just continue that way. That's the strategic way of losing weight so that it's sustainable, so you can actually keep it off long term. So thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that this was helpful for you. Send it to a friend if it was. Leave us a rating and review.
A 5-star rating and review.
A 5-star rating and review. You hear the man. And we'll be back next week with another great episode.
Bye, everybody.